Now, fun fact. This is the second iteration of this particular script that I've done on this subject, as the last one I had came off as very preachy and biased. So I took all the research I had on this particular subject and redid it to sound less opinionated. Since you probably read the title of this video, you already know the topic for today. This time we're going to be going over the history of RC tracks and how they've evolved into the high grip and in some cases modular tracks we have today. Now, a few caveats for this video. First off, I'll be going over mainly off-road tracks in the 10th scale space, as that's the one I have the most knowledge on and in my opinion is the most interesting and varied. Also, I'll be talking mostly about the evolution of American tracks, but we'll be taking the evolution of tracks in other parts of the world as well when applicable. With that out of the way, let's get started. In the early days of RC racing, specifically the 70s and 80s with cars like the Tamiya Rough Rider and other Heathkit buggies, RC tracks were mostly made out of stuff you consider to be off-road for full-size cars. I'm talking really loose and loamy farm dirt, gravel, and even sometimes sand, though the last one was never really caught on. This style of track for the time was very popular for many reasons. First was the practical reason for these tracks being easy to shape and mold into actual circuits to race on. You could pretty much just pour farm dirt or gravel into the rough shape of a track, lay down some pipe, and there you go. You have yourself a fun weekend. Secondly, there was the aspect of wanting to keep RC more realistic in terms of scale. This was a time where the tracks were more or less built around the buggies and not the other way around. Because buggies of this era were mostly designed to be replicas of large-scale buggies running out in the desert, what better place to race them than the loose dirt where said buggies were designed to run in the first place? Lastly, and this sort of ties into the previous point I mentioned, these buggies were from the ground up designed to be off-road vehicles that can handle really rough stuff without issue. This was also reflected in the tire selection and tire design of the time, as you can see with these. Notice how they're either very blocky, spiky, or both? Well, they were designed to really dig into the loose dirt of the time, and well, they did a fairly good job of that. On top of that, since these tires are usually a lot harder than today's tires, and because cars simply weren't as high powered as they were today, they tended to last quite a bit longer than today's tires. With all that being said, it seemed like things were going pretty good for the most part. So why exactly have things changed so much since then? Well, like most drastic changes in sports, it didn't happen overnight and not without reason. So let's take a look at some of the downsides of these tracks, starting with track maintenance. Even though the tracks of yesteryear were very easy to build, they were very difficult to maintain over time, especially during big events where you have hundreds of buggies running on the same track, along with any weather events that occur. Keep in mind, most of the tracks of this era were outdoors, and of course this created the common outdoor problems, specifically weather and rain. As a result of all of this, track maintenance, from what I could tell from different forums and old videos, seemed to be a nightmare. Constant watering between rounds, reshaping the track over and over again to keep it at least halfway consistent and, to be honest, drivable, along with keeping this up during practice days and club races as well as large events. Not only that, but drivers were pining for more consistent driving surfaces that didn't deteriorate and make the track undrivable to, at the time, very fragile, light, and underpowered cars. A solution was needed, and this is where many places in the world kind of differed in their track solutions. We'll get to the places outside of North America soon enough, but for now, let's go ahead and take a look and see what happened to American tracks during the 90s and early 2000s. You see, like I said prior, racers were asking for more consistent driving surfaces, and track owners were looking for an easier surface to maintain. Along with that, cars were getting a lot faster, more powerful, and especially in the early 2000s with the advent of brushless systems becoming more popular, and nitro engines becoming more advanced. With that being said, the loose farm tracks of yesteryear simply weren't cutting it in terms of being able to effectively put the buggy's power down, along with being able to really open the taps on a shiny new brushless motor. Now, there seem to be a few different solutions to this problem, the first one being the use of clay. Clay tracks began to become more popular in the 1990s and early 2000s, specifically with indoor tracks as the environment could be better controlled. Even with that being said, there are advantages to having high clay content in the dirt that you run for a track, even for outdoor tracks. The first and most important advantage to having high clay content in a track surface is the fact that the track holds its form much better than the farm dirt tracks of yesteryear. This evolution of tracks also reflected in the design of RC cars and tires. I feel like a good way to illustrate this would be to look at the evolution of the RC10 platform. When the RC10 was released in 1984, this was very much still the area of farm dirt tracks. As time went on, with iteration after special edition, changes were made to make the car handle better on smoother, more consistent tracks. This culminated in 1995 with the advent of the B2, which had a much lower center of gravity, a composite chassis, and other changes. This happened again with the B3 and especially the B4. It's no coincidence that it was the 90s when the B2 and B3 were released, when tracks began to rise in traction and smoothness. In terms of tire choice, once again, we can look at the promotional ads for the old RC10 variants and the ones following. With the RC10 variants, you can still see the old style of tire in pretty much all the promotional pictures. With every RC10 buggy after the original, you can see tires that wouldn't be out of place on a modern day outdoor track these days. Now, for a lot of people, including track owners, this simply wasn't enough. Brushless systems were now in the picture and people really wanted to use them to their full potential. This is where some track owners began to try other methods to increase the traction in their track. One method that became very popular to keep tracks together was covering the track in some sort of binding agent. This ranged from sugar water to calcium, various mineral oils, and even grape soda. This led to these tracks having extremely high grip, more than most people were used to. However, this would lead to another problem, specifically in the racers' wallets. Because these sugar tracks were so abrasive and sticky, tires that had been designed for more loose or loamy conditions were now being relegated to straight up one-run wonders. If you wanted to be competitive, you needed a lot of money to spare on tires. Even though racing is an expensive hobby and sport, a fact that most people accepted going in, having to spend $50+ on a set of tires every time you wanted to go out was not a reasonable or sustainable situation to be in, even for seasoned and well-off drivers, let alone new drivers. Not only that, but in order to keep the tracks consistently grippy, they needed to be watered over and over again throughout the day. And unless you were OCRC, who could sink 20K into a misting system, this took time to do. This leads us to the modern day solution, sealed dirt and the rise of slicks. During the early 2010s, with many indoor clay-style tracks, something was discovered that many drivers would parrot throughout the racing world in the US. Quite simply, the best tires to use on a smooth, indoor track was a slick tire. Suddenly, people were sending down their tires to slicks, and at large events like the 2015 Cactus Classic, quite simply everyone, including pro drivers, were using slick tires. This created a lot of buzz at the time, specifically about what is and isn't off-road, especially with another event that took place in 2015, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Lots of people at the time, to put it plainly, were not happy with this development. Some people were more objective in their grievances, like Jason Snyder, otherwise known as Short Course World, while others weren't. Lots of drivers and longtime fans of RC racing were very vocal in their displeasure at the use of slick tires at many tracks. So much so that they called for bans on slick tires as a whole, something that a lot of tracks, including one I used to go to, Hot Charter C, complied with. This created sort of a gray area when it came to tire choice between track to track. Each track had their own definition of what a slick tire was. It was all subjective, and ultimately came down to the race director's discretion. In some cases, if the tire had a single bald spot, it was considered a slick and thus not allowed. In other cases, if there was at least a razor's edge worth of tread left on the outside of the tire, it was allowed. This ultimately led to a lot of arguments, disagreements, and misunderstandings. Eventually, over time, more and more tracks allowed their usage. This was for a couple reasons. First, there was the waning outrage over the use of slicks in the first place. Not as many people just cared anymore. The second was the use of a new track building system in which slicks were pretty much the best option, sealed dirt. The method was simple. Pack the dirt, or clay if you prefer, as tightly as possible, then seal it off with your choice of glue mixture, add sugar water or grape soda to add traction as you prefer. This gives the track extreme levels of grip, consistency, and probably most importantly, the longevity. It's as close as you're going to get to set and forget as you can get with dirt. And like I said before, slicks were the go-to tire on this new surface. The third was the simplicity and ease of understanding for new drivers. If you were a new driver walking into a hobby shop back in the day, and you asked the guy at the counter what tracks work for said track, you get a very long-winded and complicated answer as to which tire to use for when, or how you want your car to feel like this or that, or when to use different tires for different scenarios. This long-winded explanation would usually end with the guy at the counter to tell you to ask the local fast guy, or quite simply do your own research. These days, the encounter for pretty much any indoor track goes like this.
Oh, hey there, I'm Roach. Anything I can help you with? Hey Roach, I found you guys' track on Facebook and I really wanted to race here, but I don't know what tires to use. Do you think you can help me out? I see. I think these are tires to work. These are both slicks. Yeah. Which logo do you like the look of?
The choice of tires for indoor tracks these days is both easy to understand and explain. Because slicks are pretty much the best option for these tracks, it takes the guessing game out of choosing the correct tire for that track position pretty much out of the equation. And as we all know, choosing the correct tire is basically like 80% of your setup. In years prior, and even today on outdoor tracks with 8th scale and even 10th scale, if you choose the wrong tire for that round of qualifying, or worse yet, your main, you are automatically at a huge disadvantage. The universal use of slicks on indoor sealed surfaces pretty much removes this from the equation and puts you in a good setup situation setup-wise from jump. Another big advantage that the use of slicks had was their longevity. You see, these tires on my short course truck, these are Proline Primes. If you're a longtime viewer of my channel, you'd notice that these are the same tires that I've used since 2021. For proof, here's a shot of them on my truck running the 2021 Master of Dirt event. Unlike treaded tires, which have a lifespan which is limited by how long the treads last, slick tires' lifespan are basically limited by how long the foams last. As a result, you don't have to worry about buying a new set of tires every few runs or every racing season compared to before. These last two reasons are probably the most cynical but most important. First is the track owner side of things, and it boils down to how much work do you want to do. Running a track is a very busy endeavor, and having to check to make sure every single person before and after every round of qualifying and main that their tires don't have a bald spot and meet spec seems like more effort than it's worth. This is pretty much the whole reason as to why the spec tire for the stock classes at Masters of Dirt went from treaded tires like the Positron and Ellipse to the Proline Bald Eagle, which is a slick. The Bald Eagle performed better and was easier to check if they were the ones you were given at the start of the event. Just check if they have the sticker. The last reason boils down to money and once again practicality. During the time in which slick tires were banned from many indoor tracks, tire companies would pump out many designs that would try and circumvent these arbitrary rules, particularly Proline and J Concepts with the inversion and octagon respectively. Even though these tires were touted as tires for smooth indoor tracks with the slightest hint of dust, I'm still not convinced they were for anything but to circumvent the no slick tire for their drivers who raced at places where slicks were banned. Also, even though I'm not a businessman or designer for any one of these tire companies, I have a sneaking suspicion that designing, molding, and building a slick tire is a lot easier and more importantly cheaper than doing so with a treaded tire like an inversion or an octagon. And with that being said, it's not too difficult to believe that these tire companies make a higher profit margin on these tires than they do with their treaded designs, as they usually sell them both for the same price. Now, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but at the end of the day, these tire companies are businesses, and as such, their goal is to make money. If you, as a business owner, had the opportunity to cut down on design and manufacturing costs while also increasing profit margins, wouldn't you take it? With all of that being said, there are certain downsides to running slicks over treaded tires, which I will now rapid fire through. They make the car very edgy and difficult to drive depending on your setup. The over-reliance on traction compounds make the tire wear quicker, and to be honest, the smell of most traction compounds gives me a really bad headache. If you don't glue your tires properly, and I mean really properly, they will come loose on you due to there being so much grip, along with a few other reasons I may be forgetting. You can list them in the comments. But in the end, the benefits outweigh the drawbacks and any personal preferences a lot of drivers had, which leads us today, where there are many different types of tracks out there being used, two types of which I've completely ignored up until this point, and in order to give them context, we need to go back a few years. Remember when I said there was a turning point in which drivers were looking for more consistent tracks while track owners were looking for ways to cut down on track maintenance costs? Well, it would seem like a lot of places outside of the US had a very different solution to this problem. While the US was looking to clay to solve the problem, tracks in Europe and East Asia went to carpet and AstroTurf. Why exactly was this? I wanted to find out too, so I asked you guys as to why this was, and I got some interesting answers. Dirt Concepts, another RC YouTuber who I highly recommend you check out, link in the description below. I always thought it was due to a few things. First, it rains quite often in Europe and Asia, which means the tracks erode and are too wet to race on. Which is also one of the reasons why you see tracks with AstroTurf/carpet covered features, even though the flat portions are exposed dirt. Second, the dirt lacks the clay content to hold its shape, unlike dirt here in North America. It's more so a dusty or sandy dirt. Ben Stutley writes to us from the UK here. I would definitely put it down to rain/weather condition. I also think that the planning permission required to shelter a dirt track, if granted, would lead to the land being developed as commercial premises instead to make more money. Shame. I used to love racing on old dirt tracks here. Ian Petrie, another RC YouTuber you should check out, link in the description below. Here in Scotland, we have all but one AstroTurf track. The other one is grass. The main reason for it is because the UK is generally a wet place, and AstroTurf tracks enable us to race in all weathers. They wear much better and are more consistent. Plus, there's lots of free AstroTurf around because of the five-a-side football, soccer in the colonies. Venues will renew theirs once a year, so giving it to model car clubs is cheaper than sending it to a landfill. Hayes the Hides also says, the tracks suit the track owners and builders, not necessarily the track drivers. AstroTurf is much easier to maintain compared to dirt and even clay. It's virtually set and forget. It's also much easier to change layout and bumps without needing to bring in heavy equipment, which in many places is hard to do as well. This is especially true for indoor, compact tracks where you likely don't have access to a lot of space but still want to run an event. We used to have to set up a track on Thursday, run the event over the weekend, and pull it all down on Monday. Very similar to how autocrossing clubs host events. AstroTurf can also be very easily used to assist old dirt tracks that are otherwise eroding away outside. The parts of Europe that I'm from doesn't have high clay content in the ground, so it's difficult to get a high grip clay track up and running over there. So in short, next to no maintenance, easy setup, easy change, and you can throw it together anywhere. From these answers, I could deduce that running a fully dirt track that's permanent in Europe or East Asia is difficult for one reason or another. From soil content not being ideal, to weather being even less ideal. Because of this, it would seem that AstroTurf, carpet, and pretty much any track surface that wasn't dirt became very popular in these places outside of the US. Because of this, it seemed that the 2015 IFMAR World is the next venue for the 10th scale off-road worlds. The venerable and revered Yatabe Arita, otherwise known as the home of Yokomo, would make a fine place to race with its AstroTurf track. Now, if you were to ask most people outside of the US what they thought of this choice, you would more than likely would have gotten at best glowing praise, or at worst a shrug followed by the words, it's alright. In the US, however, this was very much not the case. Like I talked about before, people at this point in time were already upset over the use of slicks on sealed dirt tracks at the highest level tracks. But to have the most prestigious RC race of the year, the IFMAR 10th scale off-road world, take place on a track that wasn't even dirt to begin with, was a pill too big for lots of people to swallow. Here are some examples. You know, the whole concept of RC is to emulate some degree the real or one-to-one counterparts stadium trucks race on wet dirt surface. That's it, period. No sugar, no carpet, dirt. I will not support the championship race this year due to the change. I understand that's all about technology, and I also understand Japan is probably not as big on off-road racing as America, but I will not support anyone that builds a race as off-road then races carpet. This is not off-road, this is carpet. Shocked that a guy known for running on-road sedan won an on-road sedan race on turf/carpet track. IFMAR, if you don't want the ghost of Mike Reedy coming to haunt you, only race off-road dirt in the future. I know some guys now using their on-road sedans at carpet off-road tracks and winning. Shake my fucking head. Even with these examples, and trust me, I could have shown more, they were still very much just a loud minority that didn't have enough sway to change how RC tracks are evolving. These days, some of the most respected and well-loved tracks in the US are carpet tracks. Places like NorCal Hobbies or Silverdale RC Raceway with their 10-scale indoor track, or Beachline RC in Florida. Hell, the track I raced on when I got back into the hobby was an AstroTurf track. Basically, AstroTurf, carpet, and other miscellaneous track surfaces have all come about due to even more limitations compared to what America had to deal with. In conclusion, I'm not entirely sure where RC tracks are going to go next. Perhaps we'll see a return to form with more loamy dirt style tracks as indoor tracks become more difficult to sustain. Perhaps dirt tracks will fade completely for 10 scale, with 8 scale and larger being the only classes that run it. It's hard to say exactly the direction we're headed for. All I know is I'll be along for the ride either way. That's all for now. If you enjoyed this video and found it informative, feel free to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, if you want to get up-to-date updates on what's going on behind the scenes, want to see sneak peeks of my videos before they arrive, or just want some stickers, feel free to check out my Patreon, where I post all of these. Speaking of which, I'd like to thank my patrons Michael Williams, RC World Discord server, Casey Nix, Ben Reeves, Dave Armstrong, Joe Jenkins, Brian Lofton, Rob Bedingfield, Caden Merks, and especially Morrison Wadd. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.